Happy holidays, everybody. What I want to talk to you about with this video? Well, it's the opposite of never be mean to someone who could hurt you by doing nothing. And I know we don't mean to be mean, but here in the holiday season, especially, what I'm talking about here is how easy it is to come off as mean when all we are is frustrated, especially the customer service people. Quick story. My mom, she's here visiting me right after Thanksgiving. She's here for the holidays. She's taken the time to let her credit card companies know that she's going to be out of town and to accept charges from outside of her area. And lo and behold, her credit card starts getting rejected. Now, this is really frustrating for her because she's gone through this before. And they said, well, call and tell your credit card company in advance, which she did. So now she's worried about being here in Los Angeles, visiting me, not being able to buy me breakfast, not being able to take care of her little boy and buy him food. And what's going on here is she's really frustrated. And I'm sitting next to her in a restaurant, and she's expressing her displeasure to a customer service person. And you know what? And lo and behold, in a few short minutes, she hangs up, and they've offered to send her a letter to her house authorizing the charges, and they won't let her use her card until then. Now, this is absurd. A letter to her house, she's not even there. How's she going to handle this? She's seeing her credit card being shut down for the entire duration of the visit, which again doesn't make her happy. She makes a second call. It doesn't go that well the second time. What happens the second time? Well, she expresses her frustration again to somebody who's like a battered child because they've been getting beaten all day by customers that are unhappy. And lo and behold, the second customer service rep says, well, I see our first person you talked to is going to send a letter to your house, and I can't do anything else. So this is a classic example of people who were already having a tough day through no fault of my mom's, and she calls them on the phone just expressing her displeasure, and she's being completely misunderstood, and they are not helping her. I get her on the phone the next day. We sit down. I say, Mom, we're going to be nice. We're going to go out of our way to be nice. And, you know, our nice is we go with the Black Swan's accusation audit. And we call the customer service rep, and I'm kind of wondering, what is this going to sound like? I mean, it's definitely going to sound like this woman's been kidnapped because there's a guy sitting next to her coaching her through the phone call on the speaker. But I suppose the customer service rep keeps hearing me say, Mom, be nice, Mom. And she kind of gathers that this is a legitimate call. But we start out and I just say, hey, look, you know, I know we're giving you a hard time. We're crazy. You know, we're so demanding. You know, I do the accusations audit with this woman, which to us seems one way, but the other side loves it. In short order, this young lady with customer service on the other side is like, yeah, you know, I see you're calling from a cell phone that you've got. We've had it on record forever, you know, and I'll unblock these charges. So in the holiday spirit, in the holiday season especially, think about being extra nice. We feel like it's extra nice. And the customer service reps, everybody else, you know, they think we're just being civil. But go a little extra this holiday season. Have an amazing time. Use negotiation techniques to make the people around you, the people in your life, happier.
So I do a lot in conflict space as well. And one of the things that I'm stuck on is what happens when you're having a conversation with someone. It's a friend or it could be a colleague, and they go into this triggered space and they start to react in anger or go into some sort of rage. And what do you do in the moment as they're expressing this anger? And what's the first thing you say when they come out of the anger? And I'm asking this on behalf of being a participant in the conversation as well as a bystander.
Well, you know, I hate watching people going downward spirals of rage. It's a toxin for them. It's poison for their system. You know, it's a bad drug that they're addicted to, and it's going to leave them in a bad place. Now, I may not always be able to intervene. I mean, I'm going to, if I see somebody in a real rage, I'm going to gently try to intervene with my voice. Pretty much just like that. You know, if they could see me, I might give some sort of body language. You know, I might nod my head in agreement. I may look confused. But whatever I do, I want to make sure that I don't at least add anger into it, which is a really hard thing to do if they're venting at you. And sometimes people are venting at you, but they're not mad at you, but they sound like they are. So if I say anything, I might say, I've offended you. Well, no, it's not you that's offended me. The situation has offended me. Any thought pattern or emotional pattern interrupt that I can get in there without trying to hijack the conversation. I mean, people often go into downward spirals of rage because as soon as they be quiet, the other person counterattacks. People think that conversation is me just taking my turn to fire back, and they're afraid to stop talking. So, if I do some sort of emotional or thought pattern interrupt, then I'm going to go dead silent because I don't want you to think I'm hijacking the conversation. I'm going to want you to feel like I'm interacting with you. Now, depending upon their level of frustration and, where their frustration and anger, where they feel it's being directed, that I may need to feel like I'm taking a beating. Gentleman that we've coached a lot that has a great feel for these skills in business negotiation, and I mentioned him in my TED Talk. I mentioned him with his permission because he's at a family gathering and his younger sister, who's a primary caregiver for their dying father, has had a little bit too much to drink, and she explodes at him, and she starts in on him, principally because of the stress and the pressure that she's under. Well, principally, exclusively, I'd be willing to say. And he says, I've seen this happen before, and I just realized it's my turn. And the entire time, all he did was make her feel heard. Now, in a suicide hotline, if I was on the phone for more than 20 minutes, I was doing it wrong, and it took too long. He was doing it right, and she launched on him for an hour before she ran out of gas and let up. And then she just ran out of gas. And it was over, but there was no apology. There was no that's right. There was no demonstrated understanding of relief from her in the moment. But the next day, she sent him an email that said, yesterday I attacked you, and you showed me nothing but love. Thank you for being my big brother. So when people are emotional, depending upon their perception of whether you simply are guilty by not participating in their defense, guilt by neutrality, or whatever it is, it may take a while for the battering to subside. But if all you do is make people feel heard, it will subside. And in many cases, based on the emotionality of their opinion of your position, it may take a little bit longer, but it will subside. And riding the storm out is often longer based on their perception of where you stand.
Thanks, Chris. So it's having the ability to just ride it out, knowing that it will come to an end, and doing what you need to do to soothe yourself while they're in that state. And hopefully they run out of gas quickly. Thank you so much.
Yeah, when people are angry, anger is a lack of feeling heard. And whatever you can do to contribute to their feeling heard will cause them to run out of gas sooner.
Remember, you don't get in life what's fair, you get what you negotiate. If you want to become a better negotiator, click the link in the description below.
Upward inflection and downward inflection. Now you're going to need to do it opposite of what you think. And I'll give you an example. We're on a coaching call from a previous training a couple of months ago, and someone is really pushing back against one of the things that we said will work. Now what you guys are going to find is we'll tell you it works, and you're going to sit there and you're like, okay. And a little bit later when we ask you to do it, you'll say, I can't do that, that's not going to work. So when you do that,
it's my gut instinct to say to you, so when I told you before that it worked, you thought I was wrong. Now that's downward inflection. And what's my tone of voice telling you that I'm thinking about you at that time? That tone of voice is saying, you're an idiot. So instead, I say it, so when I told you before that it worked, you thought I was wrong? Now, that felt completely differently, right? And that's how your tone of voice can go from an accusation to, in a way, it's thought-provoking. And my tone of voice the second time will cause you to actually think about it. And I got the reaction that I wanted from the person we were coaching. They went, oh, no. Because I knew that my tone of voice was going to have their impact on their ability to process the information. And that's a mastery move. When you want to inflect down, when you really want to, it's probably when you should inflect up. Because you're creating thoughts, as Brandon says over and over again, you're creating emotional moments in the other side. Most of those emotional moments that you're creating is you're trying to get people to think about stuff in a positive and constructive way. You're trying to get them to rethink in a positive and constructive way. You're trying to point out when you think they're wrong. And especially when you think they're wrong, that's when your tone is gonna kill you. And you're gonna want to switch it up. And that's where the mastery comes in. And with practice, you'll get it. But without practice, you won't get it. And I don't know how many of you noticed, but in the prep session with each one of the volunteers, I'm really working hard at an encouraging tone of voice. And I don't know if anybody was looking at my prep then, but these 3 people are walking in front of a room full of people expecting to get barbecued. Their brain is probably already shutting down, and that is the last thing that collectively as an instructional team that we need. And my team is relying on me to do as much as I can to get the 3 volunteers on point because they are getting ready to get punched right in the face. So my tone in each one of those briefing sessions was very specific to be encouraging and upward inflecting and non-threatening because I need them thinking and working with me. And it was all tonality. We were showing you tone before we even got into the exercise. But those are the 2 quick issues. If you want to inflect down, there's a pretty good chance you should inflect up. Just practice it a few times and you'll get it. Get your reps in.
As reminders, be very aware of your tone. The most well-executed skill delivered with poor tone. I don't know, Sandy, if you were to put a percentage on it, and I realize I'm dropping this on your head. I didn't prepare you for it. I'm catching you off guard. If you were going to put a percentage to it about how much a well-executed skill would be negatively affected by poor tone of voice, if you were just going to guess, right? Not something I'm necessarily going to hold you to, but I know you have a great feel for this stuff with the background that you have as a crisis negotiator. What would you say?
Well, to me, tone is the most important thing. So if your tone is wrong, no matter what you're saying, the person is going to take it the way they perceive it. So you've lost complete control if your tone is bad. So I would say it's up there really high, 90%, if not higher. Tone is extremely important.
Yeah, 90%. Wow, that's a pretty big percentage. So you're only 10% effective if the tone of voice doesn't come with it.
That's just amazing. It could be higher. Tone is important. Tone tone means everything. Tone is the first thing that someone notices about you. So if your tone is comes across as negative, the rest of your interaction, unless you can fix that tone right away, is going to remain negative. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's a great point. And negative covers, it's such a broad stroke of the brush, right? Because negative could be you come off as arrogant, or you come off as, right? And I think we've all done this at certain times where we deliver things with a tone of voice that says, I think that you're stupid, or I think that, you know, your opinion holds no water. And all of that comes across in our tone and what perceived intention might be from the other side. Something that always blew my mind. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Derek Gaunt. And I may have mentioned this last time, and this is just a reiteration, but it really blows me away. One of the things he told me early on was when he was in crisis negotiation and he had to choose to put some money on the phone. And if his choices were somebody that was fully versed in the skills and understood all of the intricacies inside and out of all the skills, very well versed, but their tone of voice was really bad. And then the other choice was somebody that doesn't really know the skills at all and still has a lot to learn. However, this person has a fantastic tone of voice. Like if he had to choose between those two people, what would he choose? And to my surprise, he said he'd always choose the person with the tone of voice, because if their tone of voice is extremely accurate and on point and executed well, he knew that in a crisis negotiation scenario, they would always come to resolution. It might take a while, but the chances of them coming to resolution were almost, they're up there at 94% close rate. And then the person that had great skills, but their tone was always off, there's a really good chance things are going to go bad. And I always thought that was a really interesting perspective. How can you be so good at the skills and then a skill expert doesn't want to use you just simply because of the tone of voice? And I always thought that was amazing. So things to keep in mind.
We have a question that just came up in the chat. It says,
yes,
how do you evaluate your own tone?
That's a great question. And so a few things, a couple of them will be reiterations from last time. The first part is always assume that you have something to learn when you go into a negotiation. A lot of us get off point because we assume we're going in because we got to educate the other side. We got to lay out the data, facts, justifications. We need them to understand, so we have to explain it to them. And our intention is to go in to teach and inform and educate. And it actually needs to be switched to, we go in knowing that we have things to learn, and that's why we're at the table. And so that's the first part, because that mindset leads to genuine curiosity. If we stay in a mindset of genuinely curious, it'll come across in our tone. You can hear the question mark at the end. And so that's one piece of it. Another piece of it is we all have our triggers in the moment. We all know when we feel ourselves getting cranked up, could be for any number of reasons. When you feel that coming on, that should be a trigger for yourself internally that you just need to go ahead and switch into the late night FM DJ voice. When you feel that bubbling up inside of you, just focus on slowing down your cadence. And that'll help you keep in control.
I think we've got a question here from Shannon. So Shannon, if you unmute and fire away at Sandy.
Hey, Sandy. Thank you, Chris and Shay and Kayla, for having us today. I am wondering if you can shed some light, Sandy, on, as a woman in the workplace, I found that a lot of times if there's a tough situation and your tone stays good, but you're still dealing with in a tough manner, that as a woman you can come across and really be labeled as being bitchy. Right. Instead of just tough, where a guy with the same tone and the same situation would just be, everybody would just say, hey, he did a great job, he took authority or whatever. And I'm just wondering if you have any recommendations on how to avoid that label and still come across well.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I actually hear this quite often. Women say something that when it comes out of their mouths, for whatever reason, it seems more assertive. But when a man says it, it seems to be taken okay. If you're controlling your tone, which it sounds like you're doing a good job of controlling the tone, a lot of times it's the structure that you're using. With the skill that you're using, make sure you're using the right structure. So if you're using a label, if you're trying to find out information, instead of asking a direct question, use that label with a nice tone. It might get you a little bit further. If you're having the overall problem, say, in a meeting or in a negotiation or in a tough conversation, try using an accusations audit first and mitigate that negative. You can say, you're probably going to think what I'm saying is very assertive. Pause for a few seconds and then say what you're going to say. Because if you put out there, they may think you're being assertive. You're demonstrating that you understand that they have that thought process going on in their mind. And when you do that, you mitigate it. You clear it from their mind. So they can't come back in a few minutes and say you're being too assertive or you're being bitchy because you pretty much told them up front you thought they were going to think that anyway. So it mitigates that thought, keeps them from using that against you later in the conversation. So a lot of women that I've spoken with have had this issue. And when I suggested to use the accusations audit before they speak, it actually gave them a little bit of a leg up, and they found that people were not considering them quite as assertive because they were putting it out there first.
Thank you. That was really helpful. I do have one other question, if it's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
What is your biggest recommendation for helping with times when you have tone issues?
Okay, tone is something that you deal with from the day you're born, I think. I remember when I was younger, my mom saying, watch your tone of voice. And I would think, I don't have a tone. And when I look back on it now, I'm thinking to myself, oh, I so had a tone. When I was that teenager, I definitely had a tone. So trying to get a hold of your tone of voice is something that takes a little bit of practice, especially if you're trying to go into that late night FM DJ voice, especially if you've listened to Chris do the voice on the masterclass, because the tone of Chris's voice, when he goes down into the late night FM DJ voice, it has a whispery quality to it. And as a woman, you want to avoid that whispery quality. It sends the wrong message. So instead, what you need to concentrate on is kind of practicing with your diaphragm. And especially when you're in a stressful situation, because if you sit up straight and you elongate your diaphragm and you tilt your chin up just a little bit, your voice tends to get a little bit higher. And I'm doing it right now as we talk, if you can tell. Your voice gets a little bit higher. So when you want to go down into that late night FM DJ voice, you want to shrink down into your stomach a little bit and lower your chin, and your voice is naturally going to drop a few octaves. And if you notice, that's what I just did. So to get into that late night FM DJ voice, drop your chin, let your body fall down relaxed, and then slow down your rate of speech. And that's the way you're actually going to get to the late night FM DJ voice that is an appropriate place for women to be with it. Now, if while you're doing this late night FM DJ voice, you get triggered a little bit, you just have to remember to maybe tighten your core, because if you tighten your core, your abdominal muscles, it'll keep you hunched forward just a little bit, which will help you control that tone and keep it down in a lower octave.
Thank you so much. That was excellent.
What's up, Sarah?
Hi, Nicole. How are you? Hi, Chris. I didn't have a question. I was just back channeling with Ronan, and I'm a voice actor, and I absolutely adore you, Chris. I think you have probably helped so many more people than you even know. And I love what you have to say about tones of voice and mirroring and the playful kind of accommodator voice and the analyst and the late night DJ. That really works. It worked earlier, I heard you. So that's just my 2 cents. If you ever want to practice anything or just, show people what that might sound like, I'm here for you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chris, the FM radio DJ voice excites this audience. If you want to give it to them at any point, I'm not going to stop you.
Well, I would never want to blatantly do that.
Oh my God.
How does it work, and when would you use it? I can ask that question.
All right, how it works is it actually triggers a neurochemical response in your brain. It has a calming influence on people, a slowing down influence. They taught us that. I learned it first on the suicide hotline, and then as a hostage negotiator. The mechanisms specifically are still in dispute because so much of the brain, exactly how the brain works. Like, for example, I used to say it was mirror neurons. I was triggering your mirror neurons, and it was causing an involuntary response, sort of the way the doctor, hits your knee with a little hammer, and there's a neurological response. And I mentioned Andrew Huberman. I love listening to Andrew's podcast, and I'm listening to him the other day, and he's going, I got news for all you people out there. There's no such thing as mirror neurons. Neuroscience says there's no mirror neurons. But then he says, but there is emotional resonance circuitry, and we don't know exactly what it is, but we know it works. And I'm like, all right, so the effect is the same. You just can't tell me how it works. But I know that your emotional resonance circuitry, I can make you feel calm. I can make you feel my confidence. Calm is contagious. Also, if I smile, then I can trigger you to smile too, and that's going to have a different emotional effect on you. And then if I could put the two of them together, you can have some great conversations and have great interactions. I'm not threatening. I'm on your side. And it might do me good short term to threaten you, but it never does me good long term. So this is about long term relationships.
Hi there.
Hey.
Derek, so great to speak to you. Had a chance to ask Chris a question yesterday, and so I'm really excited to have the opportunity to talk to you today. The question I had for you is it's something that I've noticed when I've heard you speak and Chris speak, is your vocal cadence. And I wonder if it's something that you guys, well, I mean, I guess for you guys it may be second nature now, but is it something that you've actively practiced? And is it something that you turn on? Is it something that just is part of the way you speak now? And sort of tips and suggestions on how to get really good at that. I've always noticed when you guys speak, you're slowing things down. It's incredible. Like once you pick it up, I can hear it and I can see what you're doing. And I feel like it's something that I need to get better at. And any tips you can provide on vocal cadence and using your voice to execute on some of these tactics.
Yeah. All right. So at this point in my life, it is second nature. It wasn't always like that. By default, I'm an analyst, so by default, I am in that late night FM DJ voice. The more often than not is what I'm trying to say. And so, because of my negotiator personality type, I automatically default to the late night FM DJ voice. It provides less of a threat to the other side. It conveys seriousness to the other side. And it provides an opportunity for less confusion when you slow your cadence down. Now, to your point, tone, delivery, cadence, projected sincerity are they are more important than the actual content of your message. Right now, I can go into several different voices and reach into your brain, and I can dial you up and dial you down just based on my cadence, my tone, my delivery, my projected sincerity, if there is any. I can amp you up and I can calm you down just based on my tone of voice. So all of you need to be cognizant of not only the content of your message, but how it's being conveyed. Because in every difficult conversation, and that's what a negotiation is, whether you're negotiating with a subordinate, a superior, a peer, or outward facing, where you're negotiating with current or prospective clients. You're in a difficult conversation because on some level, I want and I need is in your head. I want and I need is in the head of your counterpart. By default, you are on opposite ends of the spectrum. By default, there's going to be negative emotions and dynamics tied into that conversation. And we're trying to mitigate those negatives as quickly as possible. It starts with your tone of voice. You need to remove yourself as a threat during the conversation, because if you are viewed as a threat, no meaningful dialogue is going to take place. Now, to your question as to tips, you're going to have to practice in the mirror, slowing your cadence down and deliberately enunciating every single syllable of every word as you're pushing through the conversation, especially when you get to that point in the conversation where you're going to make your ask. You're going to draw your line in the sand. You're going to tell them this is the state of the world going forward. And it's just, if you're not an analyst, it's going to come harder for you, because if you're an assertive, part of your delivery is aggressive. You don't think it's aggressive, but that's how you come across. So you are going to have to work on, in the mirror, how do I slow myself down to remove myself as a threat? As an accommodator, accommodators tend to be upbeat, friendly, and their cadence, that staccato, is rapid fire, because they're running on high positive energy. And that may not sit well with an assertive or an analyst. So you're going to have to practice on slowing your cadence down. Fastest, easiest way for you to do that is to practice in the mirror. Watch yourself saying the words. Watch yourself speaking slowly. And you will start to groove that neural pathway that will ultimately make that a second nature habit, so that muscle memory, so that you're not even thinking about it. Make sense?
Fantastic. That was brilliant. And I really think that what you've just talked about is one of the hardest things to learn and do. So I feel like you've given a great explanation here, and that really helped me put the work in and get those neural pathways set in the right direction. So thank you for that, and love everything you guys are doing at the Black Swan Group. Again, much respect and gratitude to all of you for all the free content you give. You're extremely generous, and thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you for the kind words. Thank you very much.
Hey, it's Chris Voss, CEO of the Black Swan Group. Today I'm going to discuss the top 4 no-oriented questions. You'll learn how to use them so that you can gain the upper hand in any negotiation. Stay tuned until the end of the video, and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Now let's get started. Number 1, is now a bad time to talk? Look, this is a great way to get started on relearning a lot of your communication skills into the Black Swan method. And one of the greatest and simplest ways is to start with no-oriented questions in place of a question you ask all the time. And a question you ask all the time is, have you got a few minutes to talk? How many phone calls, how many interactions have you started out with, have you got a few minutes to talk? That's a yes-oriented question. We hate yes, we love no. And this is how you begin to make the transition and begin to take power. And I'll explain to you in a little while how just a switch from yes to no can probably increase your close rate at least 23%. So instead of have you got a few minutes to talk, is now a bad time to talk? Now, there are only two answers to this question. This happens all the time. You only are going to get one of two answers. A person is either going to say, no, it's never a bad time to talk. What do you got? And you've got their complete attention, which is what you were after to begin with. Or they're going to say, yeah, it is a bad time to talk, but I can talk Tuesday at 2. If it is a bad time to talk, they always give a great time to schedule a call where, again, you've got their undivided attention. Now, what's the problem with have you got a few minutes to talk? Ask yourself, what do you feel when somebody asks you, have you got a few minutes to talk? All these things go through your mind. What do you want to talk about? Do I want to talk to you? How long is a few minutes? The point is, and when all these things are going through someone's mind, they're not listening to you. So when someone says, no, it's never a bad time to talk to you, they've completely cleared their mind and they're prepared to talk to you. Now, what if they just say yes and they don't give you a good time to talk? I've seen people ask this on LinkedIn all the time. This is insane. How stupid is that? Do you really want to talk with someone when they've just told you it's a bad time to talk? You really want to keep them on the phone with you while they've just said they don't want to talk and it is a bad time to talk? That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Speaking of ridiculous, number 2, no-oriented question. Is it a ridiculous idea? Now, we ask this instead of, is it a good idea? We ask this instead of, would you like to? Is it a ridiculous idea? This is a question I use with Jack Welch, very generous man based on my interaction with him, to get him to agree to come and speak at the negotiation course I was teaching at the University of Southern California at the time. I go to a book signing. There are a long line of people in line trying to get Jack Welch to sign their book. Jack and Susie Welch are out on a book tour on their most recent book at the time, The Real Life MBA. They're signing books in LA. I want to go and get Jack to speak at the class. They're hustling people through the line. They're doing everything they can to keep you from talking to Jack while you go through the line for a whole variety of reasons. You've got maybe 30 seconds from the moment that you walk up to the moment they want you to walk away. This is not time to engage in a negotiation or a conversation. I walk up to Jack Welch. He has no idea who I am. I'm just another person at the book signing. And I say, is it a ridiculous idea for you to come and speak at the negotiation course that I teach at USC? Now he looks up and to the left and he gets this hideous look on his face. And he looks furious. And he just freezes with this look on his face. I get horrified. I'm afraid I've made him so angry he's had a stroke or something. He's getting ready to die. Finally, he looks down at me and says, this is my personal assistant's name. This is a Twitter account that we use to communicate with her. I will call her and tell her who you are. I think we're going to be in Los Angeles in the fall. If we are, we'll come in and speak at your course. This is one of the great things that a no-oriented question does. It triggers follow-on thought. While Jack was looking up and to the left, he was thinking through implementation details before he responded to me. This is one of the crazy things, the crazy advantages of no-oriented questions. Number 3, are you against? We use this instead of, are you in favor of? Would you like to do? Does this sound like a good idea? Are you against? And then name whatever it is. One of the times this worked great was we were teaching the Black Swan team, myself and Brandon, we were teaching a Black Swan method to some people in the healthcare industry. one of the women in the room who worked on behalf of this healthcare company had been trying to get a head nurse in a particular hospital to implement a program. The head nurse had been adamantly against it. She was always saying no, 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 no. This is one of the things that's interesting. People get into the mode of always saying no, and it's their automatic response. This is why no-oriented questions works. She wanted to test the idea to see if we could get no-oriented questions to work. She walks out of the room, she calls the head nurse and says, "Are you against?" And then asked her to implement the program that she'd been trying to get the head nurse to say yes to for weeks. When she simply went from a yes response to a no response, "Are you against?" the head nurse said, "No, I'm not against it." And they made the agreement on the spot. She turned around and walked back into the room and said, "You guys are not going to believe what just happened." She went out and got an agreement on the spot with a no that she hadn't been able to get previously for weeks. Now, let's do something crazy. Let's put the two of these things together. You'll find that people suffer, all human beings suffer from something known as decision fatigue. They can only make so many decisions in a given day. And they're beginning to run out of energy for decision making sometime after lunch in the afternoon, and they begin to get drained. So, a couple of years ago, I had an intern that only asked me what and how questions because he was horrified at doing something wrong all the time. He was just afraid to make a mistake. And he'd ask me what to do or how to do something in the middle of the afternoon. And I'd be like, I don't know, leave me alone. And finally I told him, anytime after 1 o'clock on any given day, don't ask me any questions unless the answer is no. And I'll be able to think it through. And then he could ask me at the end of the day, "Look, I'm going to do this. Do you want me to do this?" And I'd be like, "No, do this." And I'd give him an answer. I could give him direct guidance straight away. People can answer no-oriented questions even when they're decision fatigued. Now, how can I prove this to you? Several years ago, I had the pleasure of meeting Robert Herjavec. Robert Herjavec, very generous guy. Got introduced via an email, mutual friend. We go to lunch, steakhouse in LA. He happened to have an office just down the street from where I was living at the time, and it was my favorite kind of lunch. Free. He paid. Number one indicator of how generous a guy he is. Number two, I got 90 minutes with him. Second indicator of how generous a guy was and is. So at the time, we're getting ready to teach the Black Swan method at a live training session in New York. I offer him a free ticket. Now, I don't expect him to come. I think he's going to send one of his top guys. I want them learning the Black Swan method. He looks back at me and says, "How many can we buy?" Another indicator of a generous guy. So we're going back and forth with his team over how many tickets they're going to buy. Brandon Voss, the president of the Black Swan Group, calls me on the phone and says, "We can't get a commitment out of Herjavec's people, and we're getting ready to sell the event out. Our tickets are expensive, and they sell out because the Black Swan method is that good. People want the value." Brandon says to me, "If you don't get Herjavec to commit to the tickets now, then we're going to be sold out by tomorrow morning. He's not going to get any, and I'm going to sell the free ticket that you promised him." Now, I'm in Los Angeles at the time. Brandon's on the East Coast, which means he's got a 3-hour advantage, or we've got a 3-hour disadvantage in Los Angeles, and it is 4:30 in the afternoon. Now, one of the additional problems is we got to get this executed because by the time the business day starts in LA, it's 3 hours into the business day. On the East Coast, it's almost lunchtime. I got to execute this now. I send an email to Robert Herjavec at 5:03 in the afternoon. Remember the decision fatigue issues? When was the last time you tried to get an answer out of somebody after 5 o'clock at night? I send him a 2-line email. Number one, is it a ridiculous idea for you to commit to 3 tickets to the event now? Second line, are you against paying for them before the business day starts in New York tomorrow. That email goes out at 5:03. I get a response at 5:04. No, we're prepared to commit to 3 tickets now. No, it's not a problem. My assistant will get back to you within the hour and we will pay for the tickets. The tickets are paid for and it's all wrapped up at 5:23 in the afternoon. From 5:03 to 5:23. No oriented questions to close the deal. Number 4, which is also the number one way to restart communications. Have you given up on X? And then name whatever it is. Send that out in a 1-line email with this in the subject, and if you put anything in the body, put only that in the body. Send it out as a text message by itself, word for word. This is one of these things in the Black Swan method that you have to execute word for word. I once had a woman say, I tried that have you given up line and it didn't work. And I said, all right, well, really? Okay, possible. Tell me word for word what you sent. And she said, well, I thought the way you worded it was a little harsh. So instead of saying, have you given up on, I said, should we give up on having lunch to discuss the project? And I thought to myself, I wouldn't answer that either. Here's a side note. In your choice of pronouns, you'll notice that a lot of times people default and say we when they mean you. A couple of years ago, I was talking with Brandon about a project that wasn't getting done. And I called him on the phone. I said, look, we got a problem. And he said, stop interrupting me with that we stuff. You mean I got a problem. Let's be honest. Change your we's to you when you mean you. The other side will actually appreciate it. But this is a common problem that people do in their pronouns. Be really careful. If you mean you, say it. People know the disguised we and they're not fooled by it. It actually makes them feel very uneasy. Have you given up on? Now, context is important. This has to be something that's ongoing. I got to tell you, the Black Swan Group, I get emails all the time. First time email, somebody says, have you given up on doing business with me? Well, since I never started, I couldn't have given up. So I take this as a sign of a manipulative person. Already I don't want to do business with them. Many times, just to make the point, I'll fire back, yes. Because it was so out of context. So this is context driven. This has to be something that they have been working on for a while. Now we really got onto this line in the Black Swan team a number of years ago when we were teaching negotiation at Georgetown. And one of the students in the class, and I mentioned this in the book, Never Split the Difference, brilliant student at Georgetown. He's working on a Republican fundraising committee. This was several elections back. I think it was the second Obama election. And they're doing dialing for dollars at night. What's dialing for dollars at night? They call people on the phone. They ask them 3 yes-oriented questions. Supposed to be tied down. Supposed to be the yes momentum. Then you ask for the money. Theoretically, the way this nonsensical theory works is that people got to say yes to the last question. Everybody's been hustled and conned by this. Believe me, they don't have to say yes to the last question. The idea that each yes is a micro-agreement or tie down is nonsense. However, it's really common in the real world, and a lot of people do this because much of the real world is monkey see, monkey do, and this is caught on. Well, he goes in that night, and he changes the yes-oriented questions to no-oriented questions. And the first question was, of course, would you like to take the White House back in November? So he changes it to the no-oriented question, have you given up on taking the White House back in November? They ran the no-oriented script side by side to the yes-oriented script that night in the morning, they had a 23% higher success rate with the no-oriented script, 23%. What happened with the committee that he was working on? They came in that morning and they looked at the results and they said, don't ever do that again. That was a fluke. That's not the way we do things around here. Have you given up on? It's got to be driven by something that someone has been working on. Here's something else that's important for you to remember in this. If they've gone silent on you, if they're ghosting you, and this is the response for when someone has gone silent on you, when they're ghosting you, this one line will restart your communication. It will work, and it is a one-shot reset. What's important to remember? Remember this phrase. The system you're employing is perfectly designed to give you the outcome that you've achieved. Your communication system with the person who's ghosting you is perfectly designed to get them to ghost you. You cannot go back to the same approach that you had that led up to them going silent on you, them ghosting you. You cannot. I gave this advice one time to a woman who was selling an investment fund, shares in an investment fund. She was having trouble getting a man to get back to her that she wanted to make the investment. And I said, look, send this out, send this text out, he'll respond. She's like, fine, he's not getting back to me, but I got nothing to lose, so I'll go ahead and try it anyway. The guy responded, and she went right back into her sales pitch that led him to ghost her in the first place. And that was the last time she ever heard from him. So don't go back to the communication system that you were using. Now, why did they ghost you? Because the communication was ineffective. People continue to communicate if it's effective, if it's working for them, if it's moving their agenda, if it's helping them get to their goals. So one of two things has happened in the midst of this communication. Number one, they've lost all power and influence on their side of the table. They're embarrassed to tell you about it. You have to take that into consideration. Number two, you're not listening. You're pitching, you're selling. If you were listening to them, they'd still be in touch with you. If you were listening to them, you'd have heard the hints, you'd have perceived the signals that they were sending out to you about whatever the problems were, that they're losing power and influence in their company on their side of the table, or that you're not listening. You have to take this into account before you restart the communication. The most likely thing for you to do after you've restarted the communication is to summarize the situation from their perspective. You want to reestablish productive communication. You want to establish rapport. You want to get them bonded back to you to continue to find out what's going on. You got to get a that's right out of them. Do a great summary, summarize the communication from their perspective, summarize the negatives, stay away from your sales pitch, stay away from your value proposition, get a that's right out of them, and you will have fully reset the communication.
And so what's our alternative? Our alternative is no-oriented questions. All of you that have read the book have seen this. You have some feel for it. And so real quick, I'm going to share a short story with you. Some of you may have even heard this on Chris's keynotes about dealing with Jack Welch. So Jack's in LA several years ago. While Chris is living in the area, he and I at the time were actually teaching a negotiation course at the Marshall School of Business at USC for the graduate program. He goes to a book signing to see Jack. Oh, and if you don't know who Jack Welch is, obviously he's an author. We're talking about Chris going to a book signing to get an author from him. But he was a huge businessman. He's not with us anymore, but he ran GE in the 80s and 90s, turned it into one of the fastest growing companies in the United States. He was actually named manager of the century in 1999, which I don't know if there's a higher accolade than that. And he developed this rank and yank system at GE and was also adopted in many other places in the corporate world, which essentially means you don't hit certain standards, you're gone. There is no second chance. You got a standard to meet. You don't get there, we're going to roll you out and bring in somebody that can't get the job done. So very big guy, philanthropist, author. A lot of people look up to him and follow his doctrines as a businessman, even still today. So Chris is at this signing. He wants to see if Jack will come teach at his class at USC. Now, if you know anything about book signings, you got about 5 seconds with the author. Security's job is to keep people moving through. Chris doesn't have time to have a full conversation with Jack, do an accusations audit, do a summary, label and mirror his responses. He doesn't have time to do any of that. He's got to do a quick hitter, and it's got to be emotionally intelligent, and he's got to do it now. And so he walks up to Jack, and if you've heard the story, you know that he says, "Is it ridiculous for you to come speak at my class at USC?" And as the story goes, Jack gets a very intense look on his face, looks up and to the left and just kind of freezes with this very angry look. In that moment, Chris thinks to himself, I just killed Jack Welch. He's an old guy, and he's so angry at my question that he's actually having a stroke in front of me, and he's going to drop dead, and security's going to drag me out of here by my ankles, and I'm going to jail. And after about 10 seconds of this intense look, Jack looks back at Chris and he says, here's a Twitter handle that's private that only people use internally in my company. My assistant actually runs this as me. I'm going to let her know that you're going to reach out to her through this Twitter handle so that we can keep in touch. And I think we're supposed to be back in LA in the fall. This is sometime in the spring of that year. He says, if we're back in LA at that time frame, I will come speak at your class at USC. Now, the long of it is, Jack wasn't in fact back in the fall. Very busy guy, couldn't make it, so it didn't happen. However, he got the commitment in the moment. Why is that? Obviously, the no-oriented question. But what happened? What happened in Jack Welch's brain in that moment that made it so easy for him to answer? And the crazy thing about no-oriented questions, and I wish we could point to a specific brain science study that lays this out. Maybe there will be soon, right? With fMRI machines and this wonderful technology and being able to plug electrodes into people's brains, I'm sure there'll be a study at some point that explains how this works. What we've observed as negotiators, as content experts, as former hostage and crisis negotiators, when you allow someone to say no to you, and in fact, when you aim at someone saying no to you, it clears their thought process. As a lot of you have thrown into the chat, some of the problems with yes, because yes makes people nervous, the instant reaction is, how do I defend myself in this moment? And that clutters up the brain. It doesn't allow us to be cognitively flexible when we're worried about how we have to defend ourselves. And so he confronted Jack over a very specific want, did it without a confrontational reaction, and cleared Jack's thought process to lay out the implementation of how it would work, all at the same time with a very simple question. And so you can take our word for it, or you can do what we're going to implore you to do as a result of this class and our next two. Go out and start executing this stuff if you're not already. If you are executing this stuff already, then you should start developing your go-to list. If you listen to anything we've talked about before, you know we talk a lot about go-to labels. The reality is, when the heat is on, you fall to your highest level of preparation. And as a result of that, we like to have go-to lists of every single skill that we talk about. And we keep that stuff near to us, right? Laminate it, put it in your jacket pocket, make a list, put it on your desk. We even had a good client and now friend of ours sent us a picture of his office. and he had what we would refer to as situation boards set up in different frames all over his office that had lists of skills that he executes on a daily basis in his negotiations. So it's going to help you to have a cheat sheet. Cheat sheet never get beat. That's what we like to say. And so that should apply to the no-oriented questions as well.
Why do we use the no-oriented question?
We use the no-oriented question because it protects the autonomy of the other side. People know when you're driving them for a yes, and most of the time they resent it. The people on the globe are yes addicted and yes battered at the same time. We're seduced by the yes. When we hear it, we get all giddy inside. And when it's used against us, we resent it because we feel like our ability to say no has been encroached upon. But they're very effective at breaking the impasse, helping people to think clearly, or getting them to respond to you when they've dropped off the face of the earth. Some examples of no-oriented questions appear on the right side of the screen, and these are all alternatives to the yes-oriented questions that are on the left side of the screen. Would it be ridiculous? Is it out of the question? Am I out of line? Would it be off-putting? Have you given up on? Are you against is also one that I like to use quite frequently. Are you against X? Chris, did you have something, or are you spazzing?
What happened to my favorite no-oriented question?
Which is?
Is it be ridiculous?
Oh, is it be ridiculous? Yeah, we got rid of that. Once we got you through grammar school, we felt it was no longer necessary to keep that up.
Thank you.
All right. So yeah, that's any question where you're driving for yes, a little bit of mental power can be changed to a no-oriented question, and I am continually amazed at what people will agree to by saying the word no that they would never agree to or say yes to.
And this is not a heckle, but it's one more I want to thought, because this is particularly in dealing with the bosses. Guys, we have counseled people to say to a boss, do you want me to fail? And it has broken impasse and uncovered answers and reoriented the negotiations. And no-oriented questions originally started, the first trigger point on this came from a woman negotiating with her boss. And she ultimately completely got her way by starting with the no-oriented question. So understand, do you want me to fail? Do you want this to fail? Is a legitimate question to a boss who has given you an impossible task. The bad news, if they've given you an impossible task, it's an impossible task in point of fact. The good news, if they've given you an impossible task, they think a lot of you and they are looking for you to save the day. So no-oriented questions with the bosses are very effective things.
So the accusations audit is amazing because it gives you the freedom to do whatever it is that you needed to do, or to ask or address whatever it is that you came in needing to ask or address. And so if you're concerned that that this person already thinks that you're too assertive, right, already kind of has that preconceived notion about you, then you can just simply say, you're going to think that what I'm about to ask you is really assertive. You might say, you're going to feel really overwhelmed by what I'm about to ask you. You might say, if you're concerned that that you think that you're too emotional, that they think that you're too emotional. You might say, you're probably going to think that I'm bringing emotion into this. And so it helps if that person, you can tell that person already thinks that about you. By addressing that dynamic, you're able to diffuse it. There's a question in the chat that asked, well, what if that person didn't already think that? Is this going to make it worse? Sandy, yeah, I kind of want to hand that to you because I know you have a lot to say.
You can't plant a negative. Okay. If they don't feel that way, they don't feel that way. You're not going to suddenly put that thought in their head. Okay. And even if you do, you're mitigating at the same time. So it's not going to make it happen if it's not already there. So even if they're not thinking that whatever you're saying is going to be too expensive, and you're saying, well, you're going to think this is so expensive, and they're like, well, I mean, they might be thinking money's no object. All they're going to do is just say, well, no, not really, and just go on with the next thing. You're not going to plant that negative. Okay. How you plant a negative is by saying, I don't want you to think I'm being picky, but I really don't like that shade of blue. Okay. You threw it out there. And what's the first thing they're going to think when they hear, I don't want you to think I'm being picky? They're going to think, oh, you're being picky. I don't want you to be mad at me for doing this. So they know that whatever you're saying right now is going to make them mad. Okay. That's the wrong way to do it. So you don't want to do, that's basically, that's the denial. You want to avoid the denial. You want to just point out the negative. You don't want to try and justify it or explain it. So just say, yeah, you may think I'm being picky. I don't like that shade of blue. Instead of saying, I don't want you to think I'm being picky, because that's telling them that they're going to be that way. Okay, that's not mitigating anything. That's actually raising it. So you want to be very careful that you word this correctly, but you cannot introduce the negative. If it's not already there, you're not going to make it be there because you're saying it. So don't be afraid of that. Okay.
Absolutely.
Do you have more to say about that preconceived notions?
No, just that, yeah, that essentially a lot of times we come into these situations kind of fearing like, well, that person already thinks this about me. How can I possibly talk to them about it? Or this person already believes that this isn't going to work. There's no convincing them. It is shocking the power of what an accusations audit can do. It demonstrates self-awareness. It demonstrates concern and care for the other side. Because essentially, when you are giving the accusations audit properly, the way Sandy was talking about, then what you're saying in essence is, I understand your experience right now, and I understand that I'm making this hard for you in some way. And so even if, you're not really, because you're probably not being too emotional or you're probably not being too assertive, that doesn't really matter because it's that person's experience. And so then we're able to subvert those preconceived notions, move on, and continue to make a deal.
When using the accusations audit, is there an optimal time in a conversation? And then also, is it okay to use it multiple times? So quick answer to that is yes and yes. For the accusations audit, ideally, that's how you want to start every conversation. No matter who you're talking to, that's generally how you want to start the conversation, especially if it's a subordinate. And the reality is, if you have to go back to a subordinate to negotiate something you already thought was agreed upon, trust me, there's an accusations audit that needs to be done. They are not executing what you thought they agreed to execute because there is something that is stuck in there, there's a thorn in their side that they feel like you as the boss, as the manager, has caused or ignored, which has gotten in the way of their execution. And so if that's the case, if that's the circumstance you're dealing with, you're going to have to lead with an accusations audit. And also, additionally to that point, yes, it can be used multiple times. There's actually 3 places in the conversation where the accusations audit fits. It's always going to be at the beginning, before you make an ask, or before you deliver bad news. Those are the 3 places: the beginning, before an ask, before you deliver bad news. If you're talking to subordinate, chances are you're going to be delivering bad news or making an ask that they don't want almost every single time. And so, yeah, the accusations audit drops in, and you can use it in multiple places. There's also kind of shortened, like 1-line versions of that you can use before an ask. This is going to sound harsh. This is going to catch you off guard. This is going to seem like I'm picking on you. This is probably going to make you more upset at me than you already are, right? Those quick 1-liners at the very least need to go before. Ideally, you got a more robust accusations audit like what Derek was just speaking to. And then the other question I wanted to get to in regards to addressing the elephant in the room. Yes, thinking of the accusations audit as a way to address the elephant in the room is a great way to look at it. Based on the comment we got here, and say, let's talk about this because it's best to address it now is a horrible thing to throw into your accusations audit. If you've got in the habit of, hey, these are the issues, let's talk about these issues now because it's best to get them out of the way. There's a much better approach to that. Number one, saying these are the issues, let's talk about them, is not you describing their world to them. That's one of the real fine lines between the accusations audit and what can be agreed on as factual terms or problems. There's a real fine line. We want you to negotiate in their world. These are the things that you see as a problem. You probably feel like I've let you down as a boss. You probably feel like I haven't given you the support that you need. You probably feel like I haven't given you the fair shake. Those are the things that go into your accusations audit. Following that up with, let's talk about this so that we can get them out of the way now, is actually a command. Your intention is to be collaborative. However, what that is interpreted as is I am your boss, and now I'm directing you to talk about these things. You might want to talk about something else right now, but as your boss, I'm now directing you to talk about this specifically. And so now you've started to take away their autonomy in the conversation. You've now gone from being collaborative to combative. You are, in fact, fighting with them over what is going to be discussed right now, as opposed to opening a door and allowing them to walk through it.
It speaks to the sequencing that I talked about earlier. You want to rush in and solve the problem. That's what we are rewarding in the corporate world. You know, that's why you got promoted, because you were a problem solver. It's all about sequencing. Tactical empathy first, and then we discuss the issues and how to fix them. Then we discuss the issues and what your expectations are. Then we discuss the issues and talk about future ramifications if X doesn't happen. Just don't be in a hurry to rush into that portion of the conversation.
Now we come to what we call our Jedi mind trick. So an accusations audit is the thing that reaches in someone's brain and flips a switch. So what you're doing with an audit is you are proactively addressing all the negative emotions, because people come to every difficult conversation and every negotiation with emotions, because we are inherently emotional. That's what human beings are. And you can say you're not feeling emotion about something, but you do. You can't stop that emotion from being involved. So when you're using an accusation audit, you are taking every negative thing that the other side can possibly be thinking about you, and you are mitigating it. You're putting it out there first. The thing about it is, it doesn't matter if it's true. It doesn't matter if it's fair or unfair to you. It's what they could possibly be thinking. It's not your perception of the situation. It's your basically hypothesis of what the other side is thinking. So if you remember, high school, you did lab sciences and you were forced to come up with a hypothesis and then you had to prove it wrong or not. So this is what we're doing with an accusations audit. We're coming up with a hypothesis of this, all the negative things they could be thinking on their side. We're putting them in our accusation audit form. You may, you might, you probably, and we're putting them out there first. So this also is going to address anything that you may want to deny. So if someone was walking down the street and they were talking negative about you and expressing all their negative feelings about you, what would they be saying? Those are things that you probably want to deny. Those are things you need to address. What an accusations audit does is it helps you point out the elephant in the room before it completely destroys your conversation. Because if you leave it there, everybody knows it's there. No one's pointing it out. It's trampling all over everything. Because until you mitigate whatever that emotion is, it's going to stay in that person's mind. And if that emotion stays in their mind, they can't have an open head to listen to what you have to say. A lot of people are really uncomfortable with these things because it's like taking a big old spotlight and shining it right on yourself and putting all of your negative stuff out there, airing your dirty laundry, throwing yourself under the bus, all those different things have been used to describe what an accusations audit does. But seriously, what you're doing is you're taking away permission from the other side to use things against you. So it's going to recognize the negatives that the other side is thinking, and it's going to prevent them from using it against you later. It's going to clear the mind of the other side because you've now demonstrated that you understand all the negative things they're bringing to the table. And they're going to be shocked because who comes to the table and starts talking negative things about themselves? The thing is, you're not going to introduce that negative thing if they don't already feel that way. It's not like you're going to say, oh gosh, I didn't thought about that, but now you know what? I feel negative about that. That's not what's going to happen. You cannot introduce a negative. They either feel it or they don't. And by pointing it out, you're mitigating it. Okay? It's going to build trust quickly because you're throwing yourself under the bus. You're essentially telling them all the negative qualities here, and you're being open and honest about it. So it builds trust really, really quickly. It also helps set the expectations of the other side. Because when you use an accusation audit, whatever you're saying, if you're saying, you may feel like we're too expensive. When you say that, their mind goes to worst case scenario. If they were hoping to get a certain price and you say that, they're going, oh my gosh, this is going to be way too high for us. So they were thinking, okay, well, we want to stick around 100 to 150,000. And when they hear that, they go, oh my gosh, they're going to be asking for $500,000. Fear sets in because fear drives behavior and drives emotions. So when you say, you're going to find this too expensive, they go, oh my God, it's going to be $500,000. So you get through all your audits. And when it comes time to make your pitch or your ask, because you don't explain these at the time that you say them, when it comes time for you to make your pitch or your ask, the dollar amount that comes out of your mouth is $200,000. They feel relieved. Even though it's higher than what they wanted to pay, you set their expectation for it to be so much higher that when you say a higher number than what they even want, they say, thought she was going to go up to 500,000. But it's only 200. We can deal with that. Even though it's higher than what we wanted to do, it could have been so much higher. So you're setting those expectations. One of the things I like to use to explain this, I worked sex crimes for the last 11 or 12 years of my career, and we were having trouble getting prosecutions of cases because people didn't like our victims. Quite frankly, rape is a crime that people don't like to convict on because in a way it makes them admit that the boogeyman is out there and that this could happen to them. It could happen to anybody. So they don't like to convict. They like to find a reason not to convict because then it makes them feel safer. So when you're going into court and you have a victim that you know got drunk and then went home with a guy that she really didn't even know, and then this awful thing happens to her, the jury uses that as an excuse not to convict because it's her fault. Victim blaming is still alive and well in the United States, I promise you. But the one way we went forward and started winning some of these cases was in the opening arguments, all the prosecuting attorney talked about was, you are not going to like this victim. You are going to believe that this assault was her fault. You're going to wonder, why did she get drunk and go home with this guy? All those negative things, and the jury is sitting there going, oh my gosh, she's pointing out all these negative things. And the defense attorney is over there going, holy crap, they're ruining our case. Because all of the negative things are being introduced by the prosecution, meaning the defense can't come back later and use it against them because the wind has already been taken out of their sails. Everything is already out there now. So they can't use it against them later because the prosecution is not trying to hide it. They're literally putting it right out there. So if you're going into a difficult conversation or a negotiation, you are attempting to hide things on your side that the other side is probably already going to think, don't do it. Put it out there. This is one of the hardest skills to use because it's really hard for people to put all their negative junk out in front of people. It doesn't feel right. It feels counterproductive. It feels awful. It feels icky. But once you learn how to do it and make it work for you, you'll wonder how you lived without it because you're mitigating all the negative. Okay. So why these things? Because it demonstrates self-awareness on your part by the fact that you are aware of all these negative things the other side is feeling. So it lets them know that you are aware of yourself enough to know that these negative things are in their mind. And a lot of people can't do that, won't do that. It also gives you freedom to say whatever you want without any kind of a fear of a negative reaction. Because if you say to someone, when you're delivering bad news, because that's one of the times when you use this, you're going to be really upset with me. You're going to wonder how in the world you decided to do business with me in the first place. And then you pause, hang your head for dramatic effect. And then you look up and you say, we're not going to have those there's that word I can't say. We're not going to have those deliverables you need until a week past the deadline. Once again, you've set expectations by telling them how awful they're going to feel and how mad they're going to be. And so they're thinking, what is going on? And then a 1 week deadline really seems less than what they were thinking in their head because you sent them to worst case scenario. Not to mention you just threw yourself under the bus and said how mad they were going to be and how horrible you are and you shouldn't have done this way and whatever else you need to say. And then they feel sorry for you because you've just bashed yourself. So they're not going to add to that. This is also a great way to get rid of those things that people might have that are preconceived against you. If they think you may be too assertive, if they think that you may be too emotional, you can label this with an accusation audit at the very beginning. You may think that I'm going to come across very harsh. You may feel like I'm being very emotional about this. And you mitigate those things. Because when you say that, it takes it out of their head. If they were thinking it, it gets rid of it because you've already acknowledged it. Okay, so this is really important too, because a lot of times, depending on who you're dealing with, if you've got a cutthroat procurement person on the other side of the table from you, and you're trying to deal with them, they're automatically going to think they have this woman on the phone who they can walk all over, who is going to be really, really emotional, and they don't really want to deal with this. And so if you put that out there, they're going to go, okay. And they're going to kind of wonder, okay, well, maybe I was wrong about this person. So you can actually subvert all those negative things they may be thinking about you to start with. This also softens the conversation. So especially when you're delivering bad news, the example I use in all the basic classes is if someone from your house, your spouse calls you and says, hey, I need you to stop by and pick up this and this on the way home. I need it, for dinner tonight. And you forget it. And you pull into the driveway and you go, oh, jeez, I forgot to go by the store and get this, this, and this. So when you go in the house and you say, you're going to be so mad at me. You're going to think I'm so irresponsible. You're just going to think that I don't care what you're doing here at home. And then you hang your head, once again, dramatic effect, and you say, I forgot to pick up the milk. And then you have bashed yourself so hard that they're going to feel bad bashing you on top of that. And they're going to say, oh, it's okay. Even though it's probably not okay. You didn't come in and say, I forgot the milk. And basically, I'm not going back out and getting it. So that kind of attitude is going to cause a fight. But if you come in and say, I'm so horrible, I'm so terrible, I did this. And then they're going to go, oh, it's okay. I promise you, try it. It's amazing that it works. And people all the time that I coach privately, they will say, I can't believe that worked. You told me this was going to work. I went and did it. And oh my God, it worked. It does. Accusations audits are amazing. Okay. Davey, Barbara, anything you want to add to that?
No, she's right. I use it to ask if you want to go out to dinner. And I know I can ask anytime, but I want it to practice. And when you start off with, you're going to think I'm crazy. You're going to think that I just don't even know what I'm talking about. And by the time I got to the ask, he's looking at me like, what is wrong with you? I was, do you want to go to dinner? Sure, let's go. He's relieved because he thought I was going to say something or start an argument. He's relieved that it was only, I want to go to dinner. So it helps to get those practice, that what we call low stake practice in with your family. Mm-hmm. So it really does help, especially with the skill that's awkward to use in the first place.
Yes, this is awkward to use. Davey, did you want to add anything to that?
I think that's great.
Awesome. Any chat things we need to deal with before we move on to Davey's favorite?
No, no. I'm just gonna give a little bit more info on how to use it in email, but in the chat. Okay. And actually, the only thing that I will say to accusations audits is it really helps with that whole kind of what we were, or what got brought up earlier, just in the chat of, okay, how are we going to still be firm but tactful, right? Essentially, that it's like we're always walking this line as women of, okay, how can we make sure that people listen to us and that we're not getting walked all over, but that, we're not going to get labeled, is it okay to say that we're not going to get labeled a bitch, right? That it's a fine line that we're walking. Accusations audit is magic for that. Absolute magic. And this is coming from someone who I am scared of disappointing people deeply. And so, I talk a big talk, but then actually at the end of the day, I don't ever want to upset people. And this has been just a game changer for me. So instead of feeling scared of, like I have to deliver bad news to someone's going to be mad that this is happening. The accusations audit just helps you with all of that, because you're just able to express, I understand what the impact is and what that's going to be for you. You set them up for it. And then suddenly you're not having to walk this fine line anymore. You're creating a lot more space for yourself to be able to deliver the bad news that you have to deliver, right? It's not up to you. And so anyway, I just think the accusations audit is magical. It gives you so much more space as a woman than what you feel like you have a lot of times.
Yeah, it does. It is one of those skills that makes you feel very, very powerful, because you are setting expectations on the other side, and you are kind of disarming them by pointing out all the negative things that then they can't use against you later. So it is one of the best skills, actually, for women.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Rocco.
My question is, can you just give some examples? I work in the banking industry. So can you use some examples of how these techniques would work in a situation where you're trying to convince somebody to bring more money or invest more money, or part with their resources?
Part with their resources. An accusation audit is going to be amazing for you. So think about all the negative reasons why they wouldn't want to invest more, all the negative reasons why they might be afraid to invest more, because fear of loss is something that has to be gotten over before they can see opportunity. Okay, so what are people afraid to lose when they're bringing you money to invest? The money. Right. Yeah. So you need to think about all the negative things that can be. You may feel like this is high risk. You may feel as if you won't get enough return on this. And remember, when you use an accusations audit, you're not explaining it at the time that you're using it. You're just putting it out there to mitigate it. Yeah. Think about the court example. We didn't explain any of those things. We just threw all that negative out there. And then when it comes time to actually do the case and put on their side of the case, that's when they're explaining things. So when you're talking to someone, start out at the very beginning with accusations audits, letting them know you understand all the negative things they're thinking about when it comes to bringing you money. Okay. And then don't explain why they don't have to worry about that. Just say that. And then when you start talking with them about options and things that they can do, that's when you're going to explain the audits away so that they feel more comfortable, because you can't get there with them, anything logical you're talking about, until you mitigate that negative. And by acknowledging it, you're mitigating it. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. And if I can just add something real quick to that. Absolutely. Is the parting with their resources. That's a tough thing to do, right? So what you really want to build is the trust. Ultimately, they're not going to do that if they don't trust you. And people say there's a lot of different theories out there of how you can build trust quickly and how you can build rapport. Just nothing is going to be as valuable as them feeling understood by you. Because I'm sure that, this is probably part of the accusations audit too, right? That, I'm sure that I'm just one of the hundreds of people out here asking for your money. And if we're going to get more personal, like, I'm sure that it feels really strange to be reached out to all the time for money in this way, and that it can feel really impersonal and even maybe jarring, right? Like that you can use things like that, right? Of, okay, how do I actually think they're feeling and what they're experiencing? And then if you can get, because I'm sure a lot of it is trying to get in front of them in the first place. Yeah. But once you can get in front of them, truly the labels, mirrors, summary is just a magic combination, because once they're speaking enough to you, and if you're able to summarize, even something along those lines, right? That it's like, you've worked so hard for your money. you don't want to just throw it away. You want to put it somewhere valuable. And that's a really difficult task to figure out who is going to take care of that for you. Right? Like being able to express something like that, I mean, would just build trust in a really magical way.
Yeah. Wow. You guys are amazing. Thank you.
It's a great question. It was a great question.